people. Hello. This is Clayton Vance with Timeless Homes. Our podcast today is going to be interesting. It's about materials. We've talked about kind of more theoretical stuff. Let's get down into the nuts and bolts of things, shall we? And materials is where it all begins. You don't have a building without the materials the building is actually made of. And the structural properties and physical composition of those materials influences what you do and how you compose and design a building. There's been some very fascinating technological advancements over the last 100 years that have affected how we do things, and it's very important to understand so that we know how to build a timeless house, right? Because that's the whole question we're trying to figure out. Why are we seemingly incapable of designing houses that still in 300 years are beautiful? Number one reason is the improper use of materials. And the number two reason is all we use is synthetic manufactured engineered materials. And let's talk about those two different things. I'm going to put a little diagram on the board here. And if you're listening to it, go ahead and just listen to it. If you want to watch it later and just follow along, that would be great. Right here, I'm going to just write down nature. And forgive my writing. Nature and engineered. We, as human beings, are of nature. We're natural. We're from nature. We're natural things. We are not cyborgs yet. Maybe cyborgs can live in buildings that are of just straight up engineered materials. But honestly, we as human beings have a difficult time, and it affects us in a not so positive way. And so if our building materials are closer to nature, in all reality, they're going to be healthier for us. The closer they are to this engineered side, they're not going to be as healthy for us. It is interesting because as you look at all of the health consequences of like the interior air quality as we make buildings tighter, and now we have to have air exchangers to exchange outside air for inside air rather than buildings that used to breathe and all that type of stuff. As we've used more plastics and more engineered materials and more synthetics and more glues and more this and that and the other, and the volatile organic compounds from the carpets and the laminates and the linoleums, and actually linoleum's pretty decent, and the carpets and all these just materials that we have, it's a mystery to me that we were all so concerned about lead. You know what I'm saying? It's like the harm that lead caused was like tiny compared to what all the rest of this stuff causes, and it is so good for flashing and gutters and that type of stuff back in the day, and still it would be if we could still use it. But it's just ironic, right? That we keep trying to engineer more and more materials and take nature out of the materials, but still trying to keep them safe for us. And I think we are at a turning point now where we all, I think, recognize that you can't continue to engineer nature out of materials and have it healthy, both physically and visually. Because let's look at some examples real fast. Wood. Chop down a tree grows back. But you chop down a tree and you harvest the wood, and you shape that natural material into moldings and profiles and structure, and you have yourself a house. Now we have engineered materials, and which has a lot of glue in it and all sorts of stuff, and I don't know if there's any volatile organic compounds that actually get emitted from these things, like TJIs, which is or just engineered joists. I guess I shouldn't just call you out, Weyerhaeuser. Sorry, but it's the same goes for all engineered wood products. And because it's the glues and the adhesives that we use, right? That are really that allow these things to exist, and we love them. They're awesome because spans with natural wood products just don't go very far. You can't have giant, large, open rooms if you're just using just a Douglas fir 2x6 or 2x8 or even 2x10 or 2x12. You have to have engineered lumber in order to span these things and actually design houses the way we want them designed these days. But if you were to put as the exterior finished material a bunch of engineered wood, it would look like complete garbage. No one wants to look at a bunch of oriented strand board or plywood or something like that as your finished exterior material. I mean, that's what you do in, I guess that's what the incredibly poor people do, regrettably and unfortunately, because that's all they have in the slums of whatever country, you name it. And it's pretty sad. But it's unpleasant. But the shaping of materials, natural materials, has been a craft and an art through all time. Stonemasons carving stone. What a craft. Where did that go? It's more or less disappeared now. There's a few people who still do it, but not much, but it's just reserved now for luxury things and really rich people. And it's just sad that an average normal person can't get a natural material. It's the same. I mean, honestly, it's the same that goes with food. Think about it. How much cheaper is it to buy engineered food, synthetic food, Twinkies and cupcakes and bread and, engineered salt instead of the natural salt? It's a lot more expensive to buy organic. Just a lot more expensive. For some reason, the engineering process of lesser materials just makes getting stuff a lot easier. And so the economic system has given us and delivered us all of this stuff that we call food and we call building materials. And they are food and building materials, but in terms of what they deliver to us and give back to us as natural beings is pretty limited compared to their cost. And the organic stuff, man, just so much more expensive. But I'm telling you, they just give so much more back. And it's really, really important, even if you think about even bricks. Look at those. I mean, go back to Williamsburg, Virginia, and back east anywhere where they used hand-form molds to do their bricks and just clay and everything else. And look at how much character each of those bricks have. Why does it have the character? Because every single brick is going to be slightly different. Whereas the more you mechanize the process, it becomes way more efficient, but everything becomes identical. And so you're making these replicated clones. And in order for the thing that you're creating to kind of maintain its visual sustainability is to maintain that perfection of its first creation, right? And so as it begins to wear, the more engineered material, it will look worse as it wears because it's wearing away from its original kind of perfection of birth, as it were. And materials that are closer to nature on the scale just go back to the ground from whence they came, right? And so they become ruins. And there's something incredibly just romantic and charming and awesome about old ruins, whether they be walls or castles or fortresses or houses or anything. There's a story that's left there. And do you know how many ruins we have made with plastic? I mean, seriously, we've ruined the ocean, a whole bunch of other things. But it's just something to think about, everybody, is the closer materials are to nature, the better they will wear, the more beautiful they will age, and it's awesome. In fact, I saw a video the other day from actually I have it on the computer right now. Adobe in Action. They're down in New Mexico, and they make Adobe blocks. And I think it's a nonprofit organization, and awesome. I'm not saying all of us should build Adobe houses, especially depending on where you live. But down in New Mexico, Arizona, and the Southwest and stuff, completely appropriate. And why don't we do that? Because it's not very efficient, and we want stuff right now. And we want that with our food, our everything, and that's why we do engineered materials. We have engineered systems for production. We have engineered everything, and even though we can extract kind of the engineering concepts out of nature, we lose when we do this that organic relationship that we have with our environment. And that organic relationship that we have with our environment is something that I think is absolutely critical as everything becomes engineered and stale and stagnant and identical and so-called perfect. And as that perfection is lost, we lose the character of where we live in our cities. So, where were we and what were we talking about? I need to think about that other question, because we've talked about, stone. Let's look at stone. Pull a stone out of a mountain, you fabricate it, you sculpt it, you do something. That's going to last forever. But now we have engineered stone, right? Where we take a whole bunch of stone dust or stone particles or stone whatever, and we glue them all together and call them solid surface countertops or solid surface this or solid this. Or we have, it's interesting. A difficult one that kind of crosses both lines is precast concrete, where you create forms and molds and stuff, and then you pour a wet pour into it and it comes out. Now, one of the issues that we have with that in terms of materials is concrete, back when they had lime mortar and other stuff rather than the Portland cement stuff that we use now, it was all much more soft and durable and flexible. And now everything, all the materials we use are so stiff that they don't wear as well as the old stuff did. And the precast issue is the craft is gone. The craft of the design, and so fabricators of materials will just hire anyone from anywhere, right, to be a CAD jockey to just create their drawings, and then they'll create a mold and just do it, whereas no one there actually has the education or knowledge in terms of design of what they're actually creating and what the parts and pieces meant from any sort of traditional standpoint. But because all of these pieces are straight up applications rather than the actual building construction components, it's just a facade. They don't realize, this was actually supposed to do and be this. For instance, a house back in the day was a brick house, or is a stone house, or it was just a wood house, and that brick house was a brick house. It was to what you call width, which is a double depth of, or a single depth of brick is a width, so it'd be 2 or 3 widths depending on how tall the house was, and yeah, it was a brick house. And so how that wall was designed had to be a load-bearing wall. And that is the most important question you can ask yourself when you're dealing with materials, is if I were to take off, let me back up here for a second. We've talked about materials that are closer to nature are going to be just better for you. More engineered materials, you have to maintain their perfection in order to maintain their visual viability. Natural materials age with grace. Now, how do you apply the materials on your architecture? That's the next question. And this is really, really, really important in terms of creating a timeless house, because we just don't build brick houses anymore. And so I'm talking about brick and stone houses and everything, but we don't do it. Including, like, have you heard of lath and plaster? Where the lath is the little strips of wood that they just nail up, and then plaster was the stuff that go over it. And now we just use sheetrock, which is so much more stiff than that stuff, which was a lot more, flexible. And so it's weird because people wonder why certain houses are super echoey, and it's because of the stiffness of all the materials. What we're doing is we're, in essence, creating a violin, and and an echo chamber. And so it resonates all of the sound. And because of the stiffness of the materials, those materials have a higher vibration frequency and resonate those higher vibration frequencies throughout the house. And everything is just a lot more echoey these days. And that's just one of the reasons. There's many reasons, but older houses will contain sound better because of the materials and the sound absorption nature of those materials. And lath and plaster is one of those. And we don't do that anymore because it's incredibly inefficient, even though it's really awesome. And we use sheetrock, right? A pretty stiff material, super easy, super efficient. And I'm not saying we should get rid of sheetrock or anything like that. But when you think about it, what are the issues that we've had with sheetrock? Because it's more engineered than lath and plaster. We've got black mold, right? It's had mold. And where does the mold come from? What is the result of it? It's not the gypsum. It's a result of the paper products that are the things securing the gypsum in place. And so what happened is in a masonry house that was either masonry, then you have wood furring strips, and then you have the lath, and then you have the plaster. All of these things very, very close to nature. Stone would be perfectly natural, wood perfectly natural, plaster really close. And what happens is that house gets wet, it dries out. Wet, dries out, wet, dries out, and it breathes. And that's why you have that kind of musty smell. And I get that. And it can be irritating for some people, but what you have is this natural condition in a natural environment where the house can it actually lives, right? It's not dead. And it's not necessarily alive in the sense that a plant is alive and it's growing and that type of stuff, but it has that essence of soul, as it were, of nature. Whereas once we've engineered it out, now we have engineered timber products and or just straight up studs from pretty quick growth forests, and we put an engineered siding product on the outside. We put an engineered sheetrock system on the inside. We've eliminated most of the nature out of it, and so this thing no longer breathes and we are required to put plastic vapor barriers on the inside. So we have insulation, which is a fiberglass, and it's completely non-natural, and or foams or spray foams, which let off volatile organic compounds, right? And so you have all of these non-natural engineered materials that no longer allow houses to breathe, and they're all plastic, not all plastic, but they're all non-natural, and that is why the fundamental reason why these old houses have a different feel and age different and feel different than these new houses. And I have not met a single person who walks into something like this, walks into an old musty basement, walks into just an old house and doesn't just get excited. Because they may be like, holy cow, this is old and run down. But they're also like, wow, how cool is this? Number one, because of the craftsmanship that actually made it is really impressive. But the craftsmanship that made the machines that made the materials is impressive too. And I think there's something important there where it's a detachment of us from nature, where it used to be nature and the craftsman, they construct the house. Now it's the craftsman constructs the machine. The machine takes nature, reconfigures nature, and delivers back to us a product that's a machine. And more or less extracts the natural soul out of it. And that's why houses feel so honestly dead, empty, plastic, and we call them cookie cutters. We have no way really to describe it, so we call it cookie cutter. We call them McMansions. We call them these things, and there's a lot of design features into that affect how we feel about it. But in essence, it's the fact that we're using precast stone. We're using that precast stone is just weird to make a rock out of concrete. It's like if you're going to use a rock, use a rock. If you're going to use concrete, use concrete. But don't try to make the concrete look like a natural rock. You're not fooling anybody. Disneyland is quite a bit, and they fooled me. And man, those craftsmen are amazing, but they're sculpting that concrete into in just amazing things, right? And so you have that cartoony Disneyland experience. But for the most part, in most instances, you want to be using materials in the manner that they're supposed to be used, and you want to be using the most natural you can. And granted, they're going to be more expensive. And so that is incumbent on us as just consumers of housing, right? If we're going to call housing product, and us consumers of that product, we need to buy organic, right? We need to start buying houses that are organic materials, and closer to nature. Meaning it's going to be more expensive, and they're going to be a lot smaller, but it's going to be better for us in the end. It's going to be better for everybody in the end. Just something to think about. Now, in terms of material usage, there's a whole nother component to this, because if you get the right materials and you're using natural materials, like for instance, if you look at medieval Europe, none of the houses on background buildings and just the streets and stuff when you're walking through these old towns, they're not super fancy schmancy ordered beautiful facades. It's just a bunch of stones stacked up on top of each other with a random window here and there, right? And so there's no real actual composition, and that goes for everything. If you get your materials right, the rest of it, man, you can get so much other stuff wrong if you get the materials right, and that's okay. Try to get the rest also right, but it's just something to think about. The most critical factor in building a timeless house is getting the materials right and using them in the right manner. And what I mean by using them in the right manner is stone is supposed to be used like stone. Most precast stone that you buy, which is just concrete in a mold, and most stone fabricators, because they're only applying facades and they're not actually using the stone as the structural component, or brick, or any sort of masonry, they are not limited by nature, meaning gravity and the principles of physics, and so they can do whatever they want to do. And trust me, they do whatever they want to do. It's nutty. And so if I'm making stone, I build an arch. If you're watching this right now, you can follow along, and I have what's called there's just the spring point of the arch, and then I have these what are called voussoirs, I think is some fancy French word, right? That come around with the keystone up here, which holds all of the forces pushing down on this arch into each other so it doesn't collapse. So that is how an arch works. And then the forces transfer from here, and down the side. Here, down here, and then down the side. And what I see typically from precast companies, just because they haven't considered that the product they're making needs to still visually be as if it were a structural component, what they will do is they'll put the joint right in the center of the arch like this. And so it's just like, come on, guys. And so, this will be the joint. It's the stupidest thing. And I've seen that way too much. And so the fabricators, you have to be on top of your fabricators. And if you've hired an architect or a home designer, a builder, whatever, man, we've all got to have more knowledge. Because fabricators obviously don't. What they know how to do, and if you're a fabricator, congratulations, you are probably really, really, really good at what you do. And that is fabricating a thing. But what you're probably not very good at is designing the thing. And that's where we need to really improve. And so rather than that, it really needs to have a proportional keystone, and that keystone has to be designed in a manner that they would have designed it back in the day. It can't be some crazy, obnoxious overscaled or underscaled keystone. Another thing is the biggest problem is with lintels. Lintels are that part of the window, that part of the window that hold up all the material above the window, right? And so if I draw a window here, the lintel is this part right here, right above the window. And so if you look at a stone house where if all this was stone, this lintel would typically be a single piece of stone that would be embedded on either side, and then it would hold up all the material in this region. And that's the force it would take. And so these forces would come down, and this lintel would support all of this. And so it was a single piece of stone, and the height of it was determined by the width of the window. The longer it had to span, the taller it became. The shorter it had to span, the shorter it became. One of my favorite details in England is actually a wood lintel. And what they would do in England, in like the Cotswolds and Middle Ages rural vernacular England, is rather than stone lintels, they'd use wood lintels, but they would embed them in the masonry super far, like a foot or two, and they'd be pretty thin. And so all that would be wood and then stone above it. But because it was embedded so far, the pressures and the physics of it still made it work. But this lintel was structural. I cannot emphasize enough that because these are no longer structural, people have lost the ability to design them and apply them in a way that make them feel as if they were structural. So when I say you need to get your materials right, if you build a house and it's stick framed like we all do, right? Because that's just how we build. And you say, okay, I'm going to get my materials right. I'm going to do stone. I'm going to get stone. And you spend $60,000 on stone to stone your house. But then the stone is applied wrong, and it's applied in a manner, if you took out all of the stuff that's actually holding up the stone, because rather than the stone holding itself up, which is what it used to do, now the wood holds up the stone, and the metal lath holds up the stone. If you were to take all that off, the real test of its visual success is, will the stone still stay up? I've talked to contractors about this, and some of them are like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay, so then it will actually look more authentic. And if that's the goal is authentic, then that's the goal, and it can be achieved. It absolutely can be achieved. But I've talked to other contractors who just laugh at me. And it's like, no, because it's not holding up the stone. I mean, the stone isn't holding up itself. The wood's holding. It's like, well, it's a joke. And they approach it like a joke. And they approach it like, who cares? And that's the contractor you honestly want to avoid. Because they don't care. They don't care about the end visual product that you're trying to accomplish with your particular investment. And so if you've got a window here, oftentimes, or a bay of windows, and you're using stone, the lintel either needs to go all the way across, and it needs to be tall enough to justify it. Don't let them split it right there, right down the middle. There was never in the history of any masonry building anywhere where you would have the center as a joint, because it doesn't work. The arch fails. The arch absolutely fails. In what's called a flat or jack arch, let me show you really quick. What you would have is you'd have like a 60-degree triangle taken from these points, and then that would determine how these bricks were cut and the angles that they were cut at. So technically, you're still composing an arch, and so that's why it's still called an arch, even though it's flat. And there's so many more things that we can go over and go into in regards to materials, and go and make sure you visit our website and our architectural snippets as we talk more about materials and all of these things, because it's so important to get how the application of wood right and the application of stone right and brick right. And there are so few craftsmen and subcontractors who even know how to do it based on historical precedent that it's kind of discouraging, but honestly kind of fun because we're all learning together again. And those who want to learn, jump on our bandwagon, and let's improve everyone together. Let's build a world which is more beautiful and more timeless. So, sum up today. Closer materials are to nature, the better it is for you. Apply the materials in a way that they would have been applied based on what they are. Stone, bricks, structural. Apply them as if you took out all the structural stuff, would that stone and brick actually still stand up? Meaning, don't put a bunch of brick over your garage door. Put some other wood lintel or something like that. And every time we apply it correctly and use the right materials, it will look more timeless. And that's what I want to leave you with today. This is Clayton Vance, signing off.